let's move on. Let's go to number 4. Let's talk Scottie Barnes.
Okay.
I don't really want to get into the Scottie wars today. I just want to be clear about that. It feels like the Toronto Raptors fan base is so divergent in terms of where they are on him. I feel like you have a very strong take on this. I don't want to get into the Scottie wars today. And what I will say is this. Scottie Barnes, I think, has struggled this season. I have no worries whatsoever about him moving forward. I think he's probably going to end up having an all-star caliber season at some point. I think he's probably going to end up as an all-star. Not this season, obviously, but into the future. I think that the team situation and context around him is not ideal for his skill set. This is a team that does not shoot well from distance. This is a team that utilizes Pascal Siakam in many of the same spaces that Scottie Barnes would be very successful operating within. I also will note that, like, there's a stat that goes around with the Toronto Raptors and with Scottie Barnes particularly that says Scottie Barnes is the most versatile defender in the NBA right now. He guards, point guards as often as he guards centers and guards everyone in between. I actually don't think that's a great, it's hard. Like, it could be good for his development long-term, but I actually don't know that he's good enough at it yet for it to be worthwhile to do right now. I think that it often makes him look worse because he gets put in situations that are not advantageous to him succeeding at this point. Yeah. And it often results in tape that does not look great all the time. I think that with Scottie, the context is so important to talk about that I just want to do it and lay it out there and get it out there. I also think, as I mentioned earlier in the podcast, he's gotten dinged up a couple of times this year. Like, he missed a couple of games, if I remember correctly, due to like a sprained knee. I think he sprained an ankle, like kind of near the start of the season. It does not feel like he is 100% right now. Basically, anything we've seen from Scottie Barnes this season, I'm not saying I'm throwing it away, but I think that it's really important to establish the context for why, for instance, he has a true shooting percentage that's like 7% or 6% below league average right now, and why I think the defense has been a little bit hit or miss at times this year. So with all of that context being laid out, because I've watched a lot of Raptors games now, because I'm trying to figure out if they're actually going to sell or if they're going to try and like go for it, what they're going to do. Where are you at on Scottie Barnes? And now that I've laid out all of the potential excuses and all of the potential everything that I see when I watch the Raptors that could impact him.
Yeah, I am all over the damn place. I know you're expecting a stronger take from me in that regard of being really pro or anti. Like, I'm so torn because I buy into the tools. I buy into how impactful he was last year. And I still hold out hope that he's going to continue to get better just this year. But there are some concerning aspects of the game that I've seen. I'll start on the defensive end of the floor because that's where you kind of left off with your opening here, which is pretty eloquently done. I don't want to equate versatility with impact. That's something that I think a lot of times basketball analysts, people who are fans of the game, really want to do, is they assume that because somebody can guard multiple types of positions, that they're an impactful defender. There's value to having those guys, but they have to be impactful in so many different ways. And Scottie is young in learning how to kind of take his lumps when he guards some point guards, when he guards up the lineup, when he is in space on real superstars. I think that's the area that's got him in the most trouble this year, is when he guards really, really good offensive players, he can be a little too jumpy. He bites on shot fakes. He comes out of his stance a little bit and gets blown by time to time. Like, I think that's part of Toronto's scheme, is to pressure and want him to get into the basketball, but he hasn't been incredibly successful at doing so this year. So that's kind of where I'm at the defense. I don't know if you see something differently, but I'd like to see him be a little bit more patient on that end of the floor.
I would like to see him be a little bit more patient, but I do want to note that I don't think Nick Nurse has done a good job with this team, and that sometimes he's asked to be like that aggressive,
Yeah.
like roamer on the backside and like be all over the map. I don't think that puts him in position to succeed because he often plays very upright. Like that's kind of who Scottie is. He doesn't play with a lot of bend. And that can result in him when he has to close out like super far and super long distances, get beaten off the bounce. And that gets them into rotation and things get all screwed up. The significant flaw for Scottie Barnes at this point remains what it was pre-draft. It's the shooting.
Yeah.
He shot 29% outside of 10 feet this year,
Yep.
despite the fact that he's taken, I want to say like 45% of his volume outside of 10 feet. That's why the numbers are so bad in terms of efficiency right now. He needs to shoot. That's kind of what it comes down to for Scottie. Like to be the on-ball creator that he shows so much potential to be. And I think that like it's worth noting like games like tonight against Portland. Like I watched a pretty substantial amount of that game because I knew we were going to wade into the fucking Scottie Barnes wars.
Yeah.
And I wanted to be as up to date as possible. Like he was so aggressive in the first half tonight and like was getting downhill, getting to the brim. Like he has that capability. I think by the time he's like 25, his shoulders are going to fill out. His lower half is going to fill out. It's going to be like impossible to stop him when he like takes that deceleration step. Like you watch OG Anunoby, for instance, like OG is what, 4 years older than Scottie Barnes, something like that. And even someone like him, who I think entered with less skill level than Scottie Barnes did, he's just so physically strong now that when he takes that deceleration step and bumps you, guys go backward. Guys go backward when Scottie Barnes hits them now. That's going to happen even more when he's 25 years old. I am, in terms of Scottie Barnes being an all-star, long-term, like top 25 player in the league, I'm not worried based on what we've seen this year.
Nope.
I do think he has struggled and been relatively unsuccessful because he hasn't been great defensively and has been very inefficient as a scorer. But he shows so many flashes. He shows so many positive things that it's hard not to be excited about him as a player long-term. So it's complicated. Like what's happening in Toronto right now in general is very complicated. But I think that like the guy that it's impacting as much as anything is Scottie Barnes.
Yeah.
And while I have not loved what I've seen, I think it's worth discussing the context of the entire thing and not just like blanket being like, this is bad,
well,
you know?
And it's the curse of versatility sometimes, Sam, is when you're good at a lot of different things or you have the ability to slide into different slots in the lineup. Sometimes if your team is struggling, needs a jump, you're the guy that makes that sacrifice, that makes that move. And in late game situations, you mentioned earlier, Pascal Siakam does a lot of the similar things or operates in similar areas to where ideal Scottie does. And that because Siakam is so good, it blocks some of those developmental reps for a guy like Barnes. So when both of them need to be on the floor late in the game, and I just wrote about this earlier this weekend, the Raptors will turn Scottie Barnes into a high pick and roll screener. And he's already matched pretty much his pick and roll attempts as the roll man this year as he did his entire rookie season.
I actually really like that role.
I love it.
I think he's done really, really well with it. And by the way, if you notice, like Scottie this is the opposite of what happened tonight, but Scottie, it feels like over the last little while has tended to struggle in the first half and then come on in the second half. And I feel like they utilize him more like that in the second half than they do in the first half because they kind of let him be on ball a little bit more in the first half and like bring the ball up the court and make passes and make plays for his teammates. And he's great at he's really good at that for someone who's 6'9" with all sorts of length and can get out in transition and lead the break. Like I don't want to spend this time like talking poorly about someone that has not played well, because I think that like there are so many skills and talents that are there.
Yep. Yeah, but I think my overall point there, Sam, is that because he's versatile, because he can play with the ball in his hands or is big enough and long enough to be a screen and roll type of finisher where Fred VanVleet can hit him with a pocket pass and he can get from the elbow to the basket without taking a bounce, that now all of a sudden it's hard to peg what direction his development is going to go in because, again, he's not getting all of those reps with the ball in his hands. He's the one that's making those sacrifices. It tends to be the curse of versatility sometimes. So are we still in on Scottie Barnes long-term? Absolutely. I really am. But I don't know what comes next in terms of additions and layers to his game if the jump shot isn't the first thing to come around.
Yeah, like the jumper, for him to reach his ceiling, the jumper has to come around in some respect because he's really had like a half season of solid shooting at the first half of last season. And then if you look from like halfway point on last year, it was not great. And then this year, it hasn't been great either. He has to shoot it. No questions there. But there are so many other positive skills that I just want to like acknowledge and talk about because he is like a really interesting player and someone that I think is going to also be dependent upon the direction the Raptors choose moving forward because they have real decisions to make at the trade deadline here. Do they keep Fred VanVleet? Does Fred VanVleet sign an extension? What do they do with OG Anunoby, who seems to be the most popular person at the deadline? Pascal Siakam is extension eligible this year. What do they do with him at the end of this year, I believe? I'm sorry. So there are just so many things. There are so many different factors with the Raptors that have to be considered. And all of those decisions are going to have a tremendous impact on Scottie Barnes' development moving forward. So I'll be interested to see what they do.